Hey y'all, Gary with Tennessee Stands. Look, I rarely come on to talk about things that people have said about me because it happens on at least on a weekly basis, more times than I can count. I don't have time for it. You probably don't have time for it. But here's the thing: it's important for me to do that because what was said on Michael Patrick Leahy's show recently is defamatory, slanderous, and is an effort to impugn my character, and it's something that I've got to respond to. And it's a continuation of them trying to spin the narrative of this caucus versus primary election thing that if you've been following us, especially if you're in Williamson County, but of course other counties have taken this on as well, you know about this. But I want to open up with with how Leahy introduces me and introduces this particular segment in his show recently. Listen to this.
There's been a phenomenon over the past 4 or 5 years where basically a group led by the fellow that I call a grifter faux populist by the name of Gary Humble, who was, I think, it's hard to understand exactly his background before he landed here in Tennessee a couple years, 7 or 8 years ago. And he's been on my show a couple of times, and he was such a bad guest in terms of not listening and not answering questions that I just haven't had any desire to have him on anymore. But he has a following of sorts here in the state.
So, Leahy opens up the segment trying to make the case that, Gary Humble was just some idiot that I accidentally had on my show a couple of times a while back, and he was so terrible, I just asked him to never come back. Well, I want to go ahead and dispute that initially. Again, these folks, all they do is lie. I mean, it's just, and it's easily disproven. I don't know why they say these things. But you can go to Leahy's own website at the Tennessee Star, and you can do a search here for Gary Humble. And in his own search on his own website, here are the myriad of times that I've appeared on his show. Back when he had a show, by the way, on 98.3, which he hasn't had in over a year, which is why nobody even hardly knows who the guy is or listens to him anymore, because he doesn't have his radio show anymore, so now he's got this little podcast he's trying to get people to pay attention to. But nonetheless, I went back and I counted. So actually, these folks have included me in their writings going all the way back to July of 2020. All right, so I went through here and I counted. I was on Leahy's radio show a total of 13 times. Now, here's what I want you to see, because this is what's important. So on his radio show 13 times, when I ran against Jack in 2022, against Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, that was the first time they wrote an article about me running against Jack was March 10th of 2022. What I want to show you is my last radio appearance on March 3rd, so just the prior week of that same year. They had me on the show to talk about the Patient's Bill of Rights that was in our General Assembly that failed, that the rhinos killed. I won't get into that. That's not what's important in this discussion, but I was there to talk about that. And again, after being on his show 13 times, Leahy introduces me on his show and says, "And now for the very best guest of all, Gary Humble with Tennessee Stands. Good morning, Gary." And we go on to talk about how the rhinos killed the Patient's Bill of Rights in the legislature. And so, point being, this idea that Leahy is now trying to spin that I'm just some idiot that, he never really paid attention to. The fact is, 13 times on this radio show, several commentaries written about our work on his publication in a very positive light. And the show before I ran against Jack, I was the best guest of the day. Now, coincidentally, after they published the article on March 10th that I was going to be running against Jack, we're in 2025 now. Everything they've ever said about me and everything they've ever published about me since that date has been negative. And I'll tell you why. Because Michael Patrick Leahy and Jack Johnson are friends. And so the Tennessee Star, at least in my case, has become nothing more than an opportunity for hit jobs against me. and to impugn my character and diminish the work of Tennessee Stands in an effort to prop up his buddy, Jack Johnson. But that's not the egregious part of what was said. So he has this guy on, Mark Pulliam, a washed-up attorney who's recently moved to Williamson County out of Blount County after burning through all of the conservatives there who have now rejected his nonsense. He's here in Williamson County to do the same thing, and wouldn't you know, found a best friend in Michael Patrick Leahy because they both hate me. And so here's the narrative now that's being spun about the caucus bill that was run earlier this legislative session. Listen to this.
The background of this is that Gary Humble ran against Jack Johnson for the Republican nomination in District 27 in 2022 and lost. And this district is so safely Republican, the Democrats didn't even run a candidate in the general election. Mm-hmm. So that whoever won the Republican nomination was basically guaranteed to be elected. And Jack Johnson represented District 27 for a long time. He's the Senate Majority Leader. And so it wasn't all that surprising that he was the nominee. What was surprising is that Humble kind of organized his forces to make it somewhat close, that he came within about 800 votes of winning the nomination, and that stuck in his craw, and he knew, and he's a very ambitious person, so that he wanted to run again, but he knew that if he couldn't beat Jack Johnson in 2022, kind of sneaking up on him, that he certainly wasn't going to be able to accomplish the same thing 4 years later when Jack Johnson is well aware that Gary Humble is in his rearview mirror. So one of the things that happened between 2022 and this year, when the campaign has begun for this nomination in District 27, is that Humble's forces here in Williamson County organized as the Elevate 2025 slate, and they actually took over the Williamson County Republican Party leadership. So if he were honest, he would admit that this is a sneaky, underhanded way for me to win the nomination because I'm afraid of running in a free and fair primary election.
Well, right now, the primary election in this state Senate seat will be held in August, right, of 2026.
Yeah, so it's next year.
Yeah.
But they're beating the drum about how unfair this is, that there's going to be an election. It should have been a caucus, and this is yet another betrayal by the Republican leadership of Tennesseans' right to vote. Well, you're trying to abolish an election. How can that be a betrayal of the right to vote?
So if you caught that, the idea now is so here's my master plan. My master plan was to organize all of my forces in Williamson County. I'm not really sure who or what that is, but I've organized all of my forces in the county in order to miraculously take over the Republican Party, by which now I am directing the local Republican Party to have a caucus so that my people now can remove everyone in the county from being able to vote in a primary so that we can handpick the candidate for the state Senate race in 2026, which is my race against Jack. And so this has all been orchestrated to run a caucus for the state Senate race so that my forces in Williamson County can handpick me for that role. And that's how, of course, that's the only way I can win. I'm so terrified now of Jack Johnson that the only way I can win is to tilt the scales and fraudulently go into a local party room where we can handpick a candidate and there's no election. Okay, let me try to break this down, how stupid this is. For one, I want to play a video clip of something I explained very clearly back in April when we were debating the caucus bill in the legislature, whenever I was asking all of you to take action to vote against this nonsense. Here's what I had to say then, back in April. Listen to this, which is very simple. It removes a local party's ability to caucus for local elections, not for president, not for statewide elections, not for General Assembly. Those primaries are already required by state law. We're talking about a local party's ability to caucus for elections in some counties, for school board, for county commission, for county mayor, in some counties that are decided by just a few hundred votes. You don't think crossover voting has an impact in just a few hundred votes? If you want more conservative counties, here's what we have to do. We have to close our primaries. But we also need to make sure that local parties have the ability to make sure that they can use all the tools in their tool belt to make sure that only Republicans can vote in Republican primaries. Now, to make sure you heard me say what was in that clip, our fight against Jack Johnson and Lee Reeves' bill to remove the right of a local party to caucus was never about statewide races or General Assembly races like mine. Because I'm not sure how Mr. Pulliam doesn't know this, because he's apparently, this great attorney. You would think an attorney would research the law, or at least have a background on what he's accusing someone of. But it's been law in the state of Tennessee at least since 1972. But I know in 1972, Tennessee recodified a lot of its laws because they were sort of all over the map. And so they recodified the law in certain sections. So in 1972, they created a new elections section 2 of the law, to where all the election laws were in one part. So they did that in 1972, but this law was even decades older than that, and I'm not sure how old it was. The point you need to know is that for decades and decades and decades, the law has been this: statewide political parties shall nominate their candidates for the following offices by vote of the members of the party in primary elections at the regular August election for governor, members of the General Assembly, that's what I'm running for, United States Senator, and members of the U.S. House of Representatives. So I don't know if either one, Mr. Pulliam is an idiot and doesn't know the law and didn't have the wherewithal to actually go out and research the law, or he thinks you're an idiot and that you're going to believe this nonsense. But I have said in commentary and on video several times on multiple occasions that the law has always been in Tennessee that for races like mine and for statewide elections like governor and federal elections, the state has always required primaries. So what we were fighting for against this caucus bill is, I believe, since 1947. I think, if I remember that right, I could be wrong. That could be a bad date, but it was, I think, since the 1940s. The state of Tennessee has allowed local parties to caucus or hold a nominating convention in order to nominate local candidates, not what I'm running for, but candidates for a school board, county commission, and county mayor. To nominate those candidates by a convention or primary, so the local party could choose that option. And I made the case that, some of these local elections in some counties are determined by just a few hundred votes. I mean, in some school board races in some counties, you're not even talking about 1,000 votes. So what we're trying to accomplish as a party is to number one, close the primaries, which we've still not been able to do. But the bigger idea is to make sure that we're not allowing Democrats to participate in the process of nominating Republican candidates. Unfortunately, in Tennessee's open primary system, that happens ad nauseum in every election. So a local caucus was the only tool that a local county had in its tool belt to make sure that Democrats could not participate in those party nominations. And when you have smaller counties, even in Williamson County, where certainly a school board race in a primary garners less than 2,000 votes. I mean, you're talking about a small voting pool. If you've got 100 or 200 Democrats that are going to cross over and come vote in that primary, that can swing that entire election. And so caucuses were the only ability that a local party had at the time to prevent that. And what Jack Johnson and Lee Reeves did was now remove that right, and it's forces primaries now for every position. Jack Johnson and Lee Reeves knew exactly what they were doing. And while we were advocating against that bill in April this year, the entire Republican Party was doing the same. So just so you know, the entire state executive committee of the party was against this bill, knowing that it's removing their ability to caucus for local elections. But it's egregious to me, and frankly, these two men owe, number one, a retraction, and they owe me a public apology. Because what they have stated as fact, and by the way, before I say this, I want to go to this article that I wrote, again, back in April when we were advocating against this bill, HB 855. And, I'll take you to this. This is a very robust. If you want to know about this issue, go back to TennesseeStands.org and take a look at this article. But there's a section here about no compelling state interest, especially at the local level. And what a lot of these goons, like Mark Pulliam, who pretends to be some brilliant attorney, apparently hasn't read any of these Supreme Court decisions, because what the Supreme Court has upheld, and the reason that we believe that this caucus law, is what I'll call it for short, is unconstitutional, is because currently the Supreme Court has only upheld a state's right to force parties into primaries is based on a compelling interest of the state. And what they determine to be a compelling interest is the amount of votes that are included in the election. So, for example, in American Party v. Texas, and in California v. Jones, which was a blanket primary, whole different deal. But in multiple of these Supreme Court cases, it's been explained that the state had a compelling state interest to require primary elections to protect voters where it was a statewide election or an election with, in Texas's case, they had determined that in a gubernatorial election where a primary consisted of over 200,000 votes, that was a compelling state interest to protect that election and demand a primary. But what a court has never done is protected or given the state a compelling interest to force a local party to engage in a primary election for an election in a county that could potentially consist of less than 1,000 votes or even less than 10,000 votes. Let's just say a smaller election. There's no Supreme Court precedent and no court case to date that defends the right of a state to force a primary on an election that small. Because if you look back at some of the other precedent, you can naturally assume that perhaps the state loses its compelling interest, right? Because the election is so small. And so the interest now swings to the county and the county party to exercise, by the way, what I consider to be their First Amendment right to associate and to nominate their own candidates for office. That's the complexity of the issue, which neither Leahy or Pulliam want to talk about or acknowledge. But the point is they've misconstrued all of that and outright stated as fact that I was using all of this as a ploy in order to host some fraudulent election to impact my race against Jack Johnson. That is slanderous and it's egregious. And these men owe me an apology. I mean, plain and simple. But I'll take you to one more thing that Pulliam said that I thought was just asinine. He advocates for primaries as a measure of election integrity because, in his words, early voting and multiple voting locations protects elections. Listen to this.
And if you look at, like, what are some of the characteristics of a primary election? Well, you have early voting. You have multiple voting locations. You have certain safeguards to make sure that only the correct people vote. You have to show ID, that you can be sure that the votes are going to be counted and tabulated accurately.
So the other part of this narrative is that I've been a terrible guy because I want paper ballots. I want to go back to precinct voting and get rid of all these convenience voting centers like we have here in Williamson County. Other counties, like I think Davidson and Hamilton, there are other counties that still vote by precincts. But in counties like Williamson, we don't vote in our precincts. We just have these voting centers spread all across the county, and it doesn't matter what precinct you live in, you can go vote at any one of these voting centers all around the county. Multiple voting centers is not an election integrity measure. That does not protect elections. In addition, I want to show you this clip from President Trump.
And I would hope that every Republican would. So it costs exactly 8% of what the machines cost. These machines, they got something going. They get business. It's amazing. So paper ballots, and paper is very sophisticated today. A paper, it's called watermark. It's impossible to copy, impossible to cheat. It's actually hard to believe that a piece of paper is highly sophisticated, but it's watermark, and it's it's amazing actually when you see it. You can't cheat. But if you went to paper ballots and same-day voting, and if you went to voter ID, and also one other thing, you want a proof of citizenship, those four things: proof of citizenship, voter ID, paper ballots, one-day voting.
So here's the thing. So back in February, President Trump does a press conference, and what does he want? He wants paper ballots, and he wants same-day voting. Now guess what? Guess what is not same-day voting? Early voting. So Pulliam and Leahy are making the case that I'm anti-election integrity, and of course they've said this on multiple other occasions. I'm anti-Trump, and I'm for several reasons, whatever. Meanwhile, on this issue, I'm actually the guy promoting Trump's election integrity agenda, and they're the folks that are the antagonists towards that agenda. Mark Pulliam, in his election integrity mindset, which is insane to me, wants more early voting and wants more locations because this somehow secures our elections. That's the opposite of what President Trump is asking for, and it's the opposite of what I've been advocating for 5 years. And here's my point, and I'll close with this. As election season gets cranking, this is what you're going to hear on a consistent basis. You are going to hear people like Michael Patrick Leahy use his platform to prop up rhino establishment folks like Senator Jack Johnson, who's now a 20-year incumbent running for his 6th term in the state Senate, right? The special interest beauty queen, whatever you want to call him. It's the best thing I can come up with right now. And you're going to hear folks like Leahy use his platform to prop guys like that up and do whatever they can to spin narratives to try to paint me in a negative light. The problem is I can come on and show you at every step where they are lying to you. And if you notice, you go back and watch Leahy's show. I'm sure none of you do. They never show you proof. They never show you a document. They never point to what I actually said. There's never anything of substance that they show you. They only run their mouth. They just talk and talk and talk, and the idea is that the more they talk and the more they repeat the lie, the more likely you are to believe it. But they never have anything to actually support what they're saying. So I hope you guys are paying attention, because here's the thing. This is not just about me. 2026 is a massive election year. Of course, I'm running against Jack Johnson. There are several incumbents across the state that are going to be primaried. Pay attention to your county. I can just tell you, in my own county here in Williamson County, all 24 county commission seats are up for election. 6 of our school board seats, half of our school board is up for election. Our county mayor is up for election, and Bill Lee is termed out, and so we've got a contested race for governor. So 2026 is going to be a huge year, and you can expect the hacks like Michael Patrick Leahy and, other Rhino radio stations and corporate media across the state, as well as millions of dollars that are going to be pumped into the state from DC special interests, are going to do their worst trying to paint conservatives as the bad guys. And they're going to use Trump, illegal immigration, all the buzz stuff. They're going to try to figure out a way to twist words to make you think that people that you actually know to be supporting your values are bad people. So be aware. A lot of this is on you to go out to your neighbors and family and friends and make sure they know the truth. And the grassroots is counting on you for that, because we don't have the millions of dollars, right, to combat all of this nonsense that's going to come our way during all of these elections across the state. And these elections are important because this is how we change the game. So that's all I've got. Michael Patrick Leahy is a fraud. You should turn that off because it is what it is. And by the way, I'll close with this. This is for Mark Pulliam and Michael Patrick Leahy, both of whom live in Williamson County. Just want you guys to know, come January of 2027, I'm going to be proud to be serving as your new state senator. And you guys both have my phone number, so feel free to give me a call. And if there's ever anything I can do for you, just let me know. God bless you.